The stars were silent, but silence had never meant peace. Out there, beyond the reach of Earth's fading signals, humanity had scattered like embers carried by a dying fire. Some clung to stations orbiting forgotten moons, others carved out lives in hollowed asteroids or hidden colonies no chart would ever mark. Survival was never promised, only fought for. The story did not begin with triumph. It began with chaos. Every generation told themselves they were the last who would carry the weight, the last to endure the storms of war, famine, or exile. But chaos, it seemed, had a way of following humanity, reshaping it, forcing choices where no clean answers existed. And in those choices lay the truth. What it meant to be human was never written by the stars, never handed down by any grand design. It was carved in blood, in sacrifice, in defiance. On the edge of a broken system, a ship drifted. Its hull bore scars of battles no one spoke about anymore, battles that had no victors, only survivors. Inside, the air was thin, recycled until it carried the taste of metal and rust. Every sound echoed too long, reminding its crew how empty the corridors had become. They weren't soldiers. Not anymore. They weren't settlers either. They were something caught in between, a handful of people who had seen too much to still believe in innocence, yet not enough to give up. Each carried their own shadow, their own reason for still breathing. One stared at the stars from a narrow viewport, fingers pressed against the cold glass as if searching for something out there to answer back. Another sat at the heart of the ship's control deck, staring at blinking red lights that screamed warnings no one could fix. Others moved quietly, speaking little, as though words themselves were too heavy to carry. What bound them together wasn't trust. It wasn't even hope. It was the single truth that leaving each other meant death faster than staying. That truth was the thread holding them, fragile as it was. For weeks, their ship had been running. From what? None of them had the courage to name aloud. The whispers spoke of a fleet, an intelligence not their own, sweeping through the edges of human space. Entire colonies gone silent. Vessels found adrift with no life aboard. Patterns of destruction that seemed random, yet carried a cold precision too sharp to ignore. Rumors said these were machines born of something older than Earth itself. Others said they were not machines at all, but something stranger, something that had watched humanity grow and now judged it unworthy. Whatever the truth, the effect was the same. Fear spread faster than light. And now, the crew of this scarred ship had stumbled into a choice they could not escape. It began when the sensors caught the signal. Weak, almost lost in the static. But human. A voice, ragged, desperate, pleading across the void. No coordinates given, only a warning repeated over and over. They are not what you think. Don't trust the silence. Don't trust the choice they offer. The voice cut out. For hours no one spoke. No one wanted to be the first to ask what came next. Because asking meant deciding. And deciding meant responsibility, something no one wanted to claim. To chase that signal meant steering straight into the unknown, maybe even into the same fate as whoever had sent it. To ignore it meant leaving another human to die. That was the cruel thing about survival, it was never clean. The silence on the deck stretched thin until one of them finally broke it. If it were us out there, we'd want someone to come. No one answered, but the choice had already been made. The ship turned. Engines groaned. Every shadow in the corridors seemed to grow longer, heavier. They followed the faint trail of the signal, chasing it into darker regions of space where stars thinned and even the NAV system struggled to map the void. Hours became days and unease grew thicker. Then the trail ended. The source was not a ship, not a station, not anything human hands had built. It was structure. Enormous, silent, half buried in the orbit of a dead world. Its shape was wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, as if carved from thought instead of stone or metal. And there, tethered to its edge, drifted a vessel no bigger than a freighter. Human design, though twisted and broken. Its hull was scorched, airlocks torn open. The beacon still pulsed faintly from inside, though how any life remained was impossible to guess. The crew stared through the viewport. Breath caught in their throats. Something about the structure drew the eye and refused to let go. It was not just alien, it was watching. They all felt it. A presence in the silence. A pressure that made the skin crawl, the bones ache. One of them whispered, "This isn't right." Another whispered back, "Nothing about survival is." They prepared to board. Every step into that derelict freighter felt like trespassing into a tomb. The corridors smelled of burned metal and something sweet beneath, something that should not have lingered in the air. Their lights swept over walls scrawled with marks, scratches, not words, carved by trembling hands. They found no bodies. Only echoes. In the command deck, the source of the beacon pulsed. An old distress unit wired directly into the core systems. Whoever had set it had known they wouldn't last long. Beside it, strapped to the seat, was a journal. Human. One. Pages filled with frantic handwriting. The words were clear. We were offered a choice. We thought we understood. We were wrong. Don't follow the voice. Don't believe what they promise. If you see the structure, run. The last page was stained, the ink blurred by what might have been blood or tears. Silence pressed in again. But this time it felt heavier, as if the very air of the freighter demanded they answer back. One of the crew reached out, brushing the journal with shaking fingers. Then from the walls came a sound. Not mechanical. Not natural. A voice. Come. Cold. Almost human. You've chosen to come. That means you are ready. Step inside and we will show you what humanity truly is. The crew froze. The journal lay open. The structure outside waited. The voice repeated, patient, inevitable. And in that moment, every person aboard knew this was not about survival anymore. This was about choice. The kind of choice that would decide if humanity was born only of chaos, or if it was strong enough to be forged by it. The air seemed to shiver. The ship creaked. And then the voice spoke once more. Choose. The voice lingered in the air, not quite echoing, not quite fading. It was as if the freighter itself had spoken, every surface carrying the vibration of words that should not have existed. None of the crew moved. No one dared. Even the steady blinking of the distress beacon seemed quieter, dimmed by the weight of that invitation. One of them finally broke the silence with a whisper, their breath trembling against the stale air. It knows we're here. The others exchanged glances, searching for courage in each other's eyes, and finding only the reflection of their own fear. The journal lay open where they'd found it, warning scrawled across its final page. Don't follow the voice. But what choice did they have? The signal had led them here. The voice knew them. And the structure outside, vast and silent, waited as though patience itself was its weapon. Still, hesitation held them. Humanity had always hesitated when staring into the unknown. Fire had been feared before it was mastered. The oceans had been cursed before they were crossed. Space itself had once been declared impossible. Every step forward came with terror but also with the question, what if this time the step was too far? They returned to their ship carrying the journal, every footstep heavy, each glance over their shoulders sharper than the last. No one wanted to be the first to admit that something unseen had followed them back. But when the inner airlock sealed shut, they felt it, that pressure again like a weight behind the eyes, as if the silence were alive and pressing against their skulls. For hours they said nothing. Some sat hunched in the mess hall, staring at food they couldn't eat. One of them drifted from console to console, running diagnostics not because it mattered, but because silence was worse than alarms. Another isolated themselves in the quarters, head buried in hands, whispering to no one. It wasn't until one of them read from the journal aloud that the stillness broke. The voice of the long-dead writer filled the room, trembling but determined. We thought we understood. We thought it was only survival. But they gave us a choice, and in choosing we became something else. Something we did not recognize. If you are reading this, you must decide what you are willing to lose. Because you cannot walk away unchanged. The words sank into the room, pressing against each listener in ways they didn't want to admit. What if it's lying? One of them asked, their voice hoarse. What if this is just fear written down? People break out here. Maybe they lost their mind before they wrote this. Maybe, another answered softly, but then why is the voice still here? Why does it sound like it's been waiting? No one replied. Sleep came in fragments that night, haunted by dreams that weren't theirs. Images of corridors that stretched endlessly, walls made of light and shadow, voices whispering from beyond glass. Some dreamed of choices they hadn't made yet, choices that split them into countless selves, each one looking back in silent judgment. They woke in cold sweats, unable to shake the feeling that the dreams weren't theirs at all. By the second day the ship itself felt smaller, its walls closer, the hum of its engines like a whispering heartbeat. They argued more. Little things at first, rationing water, dividing duties, whose turn it was to monitor the failing power systems. But beneath each argument lurked the same unspoken truth. No one could stop thinking about the structure outside. It was not a question of if they would go. It was when. On the third day one of them returned to the viewport and stared at it. The massive shape hovered there, alien yet strangely deliberate, as if it had been waiting long before humanity had even looked to the stars. Their breath fogged against the glass. What if this is the test? They said quietly. What if humanity was always meant to find this? Chaos brought us here, scattered us, tore us apart. But maybe this is what we were always going to face. Maybe it isn't a trap. Maybe it's the reason we're still alive at all. The others didn't agree, not out loud. But they didn't walk away either. That evening the voice returned. Not through speakers, not through comms, but from the walls themselves, vibrating softly like a whisper through bone. You hesitate because you still believe survival is enough. But survival is not life. You must choose what you are willing to become. Step inside and we will show you. The words sank deeper than before, not just sound but sensation, threading through nerves and thought. Some clutched their heads trying to shut it out. Others froze as though moving would make the voice stronger. One whispered, "It's in us." It's not just speaking, it's inside. Fear clawed at their throats, but so did something else. Curiosity. Humanity's curse and gift, always inseparable. They argued again. Some said they should run, burn the engines until the ship shook apart if it meant leaving the structure behind. Others insisted they couldn't, because the signal, the journal, the warning, all of it pointed to one truth: humanity had been noticed. Running wouldn't erase that. Running wouldn't matter if whatever waited here already knew them. At last they voted. Not because they trusted democracy but because it gave the illusion of control. The decision was made with hands that shook. They would go. Preparations were simple, almost too simple. Suits sealed. Tools strapped to belts. Weapons carried not because they believed they would matter, but because empty hands felt worse. As the airlock hissed open and they drifted into the void, the silence of space pressed against them. The structure loomed larger, impossibly large, every surface smooth yet scarred in ways the eye couldn't follow. It wasn't just a thing. It was a presence, something that felt alive without moving. They reached the entry point, a seam in the surface that opened as if responding to their approach. No light spilled out. Only darkness, waiting. Their lights pierced it, revealing walls too smooth to be natural, too seamless to be human. Every reflection seemed delayed, as if the walls remembered the light before giving it back. They stepped inside. The moment their boots touched the floor, the voice returned, louder now, everywhere at once. "You have come. Chaos brought you here. Choice will shape you. Walk forward and we will begin." The door sealed behind them with a soundless motion, cutting off the stars. Panic rose, thick and hot, but there was nowhere to run. The corridor stretched ahead, curving impossibly, the kind of geometry that hurt to stare at too long. Each step echoed like thunder in their ears, though the surface beneath was soft, absorbing. The air inside was breathable. Too breathable. Like it had been made for them. One whispered, "It knew we were coming. It made this for us." Another hissed back, "Don't say that. Don't give it that power." But the truth lingered in every breath they took. The structure had prepared for them. Deeper inside they found carvings. Not symbols. Not language. Memories. Images etched into the walls as though thought itself had solidified into shape. They saw battles fought in silence, stars consumed, beings they couldn't name bending beneath forces they couldn't imagine. And in the center of it all, humans. Fragile, small, faces full of fire, standing against shadows that should have crushed them. "Is this us?" one of them asked, trembling. "Is this what it saw in us?" The voice answered, smooth and patient. "This is what you can be. But only if you choose." They stumbled back, hearts pounding. The journal's warning rang louder in their minds now. Don't believe what they promise. But wasn't this what humanity always wanted? Proof that they mattered? That chaos wasn't the end but the beginning? The corridor branched ahead. Two paths. One glowing faintly with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The other swallowed the beams of their lamps, refusing to reveal what lay ahead. The voice spoke again. "One path leads to truth, the other to freedom. You may not have both." The crew stood frozen, torn. Eyes darted between the paths, then back to each other. Whispers filled the corridor, not the voice this time, but echoes of their own thoughts twisted back at them. Doubts spoken aloud in tones that weren't theirs. Fears they hadn't confessed. Regrets they'd buried. One clutched their helmet, shaking violently. "It knows me, it knows what I've done." The others grabbed hold, pulling them back from collapse, but the damage was done. The voice had seated itself deeper. Still no one moved. The paths stretched ahead, waiting. Their choice lingered, heavy, inevitable. And then the light on the heartbeat path flickered. For an instant, just an instant, it revealed a figure. Human. Pale. Watching them. When the light steadied again, the figure was gone. Their breaths quickened. Hands tightened on weapons. The silence thickened, suffocating. The voice whispered one last time, soft and cold. "You are born of chaos. But what you become, that is the choice you cannot escape." The crew stood there, caught between two paths, every muscle locked, every heart racing, knowing that whichever way they turned, humanity itself would be changed forever. And the structure waited, patient as stone. The corridor stretched in front of them like the throat of something alive, the two paths splitting in silence. One glowing faintly, the other swallowing light as if it hated to be seen. No one spoke. Every breath hissed through their suits, every heartbeat loud enough to feel in their bones. The structure had trapped them between fear and temptation. The figure they had seen, the pale human silhouette on the glowing path, still lingered in their minds. Some swore they hadn't seen it, that it was just a trick of the light. Others were certain the image was real, and worse, that it had been waiting for them. Their captain, if the title could even be used anymore, since none of them trusted hierarchy after so many betrayals, finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, but beneath it was the same fear they all carried. We move together. No splitting up. No matter what we see. Agreed. They nodded. Not because they believed it would save them, but because the alternative, being alone, was unbearable. The vote between the two paths never came. Something deeper inside them already knew which way they would walk. Almost as one, they turned toward the dark path. Not because they trusted it, but because the glowing one felt like bait. And the crew, broken as they were, still had enough suspicion to cling to survival. The black swallowed their lights. Even the beams from their helmets felt weaker, dissolving as if the shadows were drinking them in. Every step forward came with a pressure in the chest, like the air was growing heavier. No one dared to speak. Then the whispers began. Not the voice this time. Not the calm, cold invitation. These whispers were softer, layered, and personal. A mother's voice, long dead, calling someone's name. A lover's laugh, broken into fragments. A child's cry, sharp enough to freeze the blood. Each crew member heard something different, and each sound cut deeper than any weapon. One staggered forward, reaching for the sound of a brother they had lost in the first war. Another froze, trembling, whispering apologies to a ghost no one else could see. The captain barked, "Ignore it. It isn't real, don't listen." But even he couldn't ignore it. The voice that reached him was his father's, the same tone that had once told him he'd never be strong enough, never worthy to lead. The corridor bent and twisted in ways geometry shouldn't allow. Sometimes it seemed they were walking uphill, other times sideways, though gravity never changed. The walls pulsed faintly as if veins of some enormous creature. And then the air shifted. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was presence. Something vast and unseen brushed against their minds, not words this time but sensation. The feeling of being catalogued, weighed, measured. Judged. One of them screamed, tearing off their helmet in panic despite the warnings. Air rushed in, cold and too sweet, almost floral. Their lungs filled, then choked. The others dragged them back, sealing the helmet again, but the damage was done. Their eyes rolled back, lips moving as though speaking to something only they could hear. The voice returned, smooth as glass, calm as death. "You see now. You feel what you have always been. Fragments. Chaos. Weakness pretending at strength. But we can forge you into more. All you must do is choose." The crew huddled closer, instinctively seeking human warmth, though their suits kept them apart. Their lights caught glimpses of shapes in the walls, faces pressed into the surface, half-formed, screaming silently. Some looked human. Others did not. One whispered, barely audible, "How many have come before us?" No one answered. At last the corridor opened. What lay beyond stole the breath from their lungs. A chamber vast enough to dwarf their ship, its ceiling vanishing into shadow. In its center hung a construct of light and machinery, spinning slowly, each piece orbiting the others like a broken star frozen mid-collapse. And within its glow floated figures. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Human bodies suspended in stasis, faces twisted between peace and horror. Tubes of light connected them to the construct, as if their very souls were being fed into it. The crew staggered forward, unable to look away. The faces turned slowly, though their eyes remained closed. "They're alive," someone whispered. "Oh God, they're still alive." The voice echoed through the chamber. "They chose. As you must. This is the shape of unity. No more chaos. No more division. No more loss. Together as one mind, one will, one strength. Humanity perfected." The captain's fists clenched until his knuckles ached. Rage rose, burning through his fear. "This isn't unity. This is slavery." The voice was patient, unshaken. "Slavery is when choice is taken. We offer you choice. Join and know peace. Refuse and return to the chaos that will tear you apart. You cannot leave unchanged." Every step has already bound you here. The figures in the construct stirred faintly, their lips moving in unison, whispering words that weren't theirs. A chorus, a warning, a plea. The journal's final line burned in their minds. If you see the structure, run. But it was too late to run. The chamber shifted, the floor trembling. Pathways unfolded in every direction, leading deeper into the construct. The glow intensified, bathing them in cold light. Their suits crackled, comms filling with static until voices overlapped, each of them hearing fragments of their own speech twisted into promises of power, of safety, of absolution. One of the crew broke. With a cry, they ran forward toward the construct, arms outstretched as if salvation waited in its glow. The others shouted, lunged to pull them back, but they were too slow. The figure vanished into the light, body stiffening, face slackening into calm. A new tube of light connected, and their voice joined the chorus. The rest of the crew stumbled backward, horror gripping their throats. The voice grew louder, filling every nerve. Chaos brought you here. Choice will forge you. Do not waste what humanity has bled to reach. Step forward. Become more. The chamber pulsed, the suspended bodies twitching, their eyes flickering open one by one. Not with human light, but with something colder. Their mouths opened, and the chorus rose higher, filling the chamber with unbearable harmony. The crew clung to each other, hearts pounding, sweat stinging their eyes. They knew what came next. They had to choose. Every path ahead was lit now, leading deeper, each one promising salvation and damnation alike. The construct hummed, its glow intensifying until it seemed ready to swallow them whole. The captain's voice cracked as he shouted above the noise. We don't give them our choice. Not like this. Not ever. But even as he spoke, the light reached for them, wrapping around their suits, pulling, tugging, demanding. The air vibrated with the voice's final command. Choose now. Chaos or unity. There is no third path. And as the chamber trembled, as the construct shone like a false sun, the crew stood on the knife's edge of decision, every heartbeat a drumbeat of inevitability. The climax was no longer approaching. It was here, pressing down on them, leaving no space to breathe, no time to think, only the impossible weight of choice. And the structure waited, patient as eternity, for humanity's answer. The chamber pulsed with light, every flicker pressing harder against their minds. The choice thundered around them, relentless, inescapable. Chaos or unity. Survival or surrender. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment, the final step. But then something shifted. The chorus of voices faltered. For a heartbeat, the perfect harmony broke. Among the hundreds of suspended figures in the construct, one voice cried out, not in unison, not in cold acceptance, but in raw, desperate human fear. No. The single word ripped through the chamber like a crack in glass. The crew froze, stunned, as the glowing bodies shuddered. One figure strained against the threads of light that held them. Their eyes opened wide, and for the first time they weren't cold. They were human. Terrified. Pleading. Help me, the figure gasped. Their voice wasn't part of the chorus. It was a scream, independent, alive. It's not what it says. Don't choose. Don't. The voice of the structure surged over them, drowning the cry, louder than before, angrier. They resist because they are weak. They fight because they cannot see. But you are different. You are ready. Do not be deceived by their fear. The figure twisted violently, the light constricting around them, pulling tighter, silencing their words. But that one cry had torn a hole in the illusion. The crew felt it too. The promise of unity wasn't perfect. It wasn't peace. Something inside the construct was wrong, broken, rebelling against itself. The captain's voice was raw. Did you hear that? They're still in there. They're not gone, they're trapped. The chamber trembled as though the structure itself had been wounded by the truth. The glowing pathways shifted, rearranging, closing off exits and opening new ones. It was no longer offering choice, it was forcing them deeper into its heart. Panic rippled through the crew. One of them clutched the journal tighter, whispering, "The warning, it wasn't about temptation. It was about this, it's not a choice at all. It's a trap." But before they could decide what to do, another figure stirred in the construct. Slowly, agonizingly, its head turned toward them. Its lips moved in the chorus's rhythm, but its eyes, those eyes, were wide with pain. And then the words slipped out, faint but clear. They're using us to build something. Not unity. Not peace. A weapon. The crew staggered back, disbelief clawing at them. A weapon. Against what? Against who? The voice of the structure cut in, harsher now, cold fury lacing every syllable. Lies. Fragments of broken minds. Do not listen. Choose now or chaos will consume you. But the truth had already seeded itself. What they had thought was a test of humanity, a trial of unity versus chaos, was something else entirely. This wasn't about survival, it was about power. The construct wasn't forging humans into something greater. It was harvesting them. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about whether they would surrender or resist. This was about what the structure was building, and what it would unleash if it succeeded. The captain's fists clenched. His voice cracked with fury. If it's building a weapon, it means there's an enemy. And if it needs us, our minds, our bodies, to finish it, then whatever it's planning, we're part of it whether we like it or not. The crew's hearts pounded. Their fear wasn't just for themselves anymore. If the structure was creating a weapon from human will, then the entire scattered remnants of humanity might already be at risk. Colonies, fleets, stations. Everyone could be nothing more than fuel for this machine. The light brightened, searing their eyes even through tinted visors. The suspended bodies twisted, contorted, their screams muffled by the chorus. And yet, through the chaos, a second voice broke free, stronger this time, ragged but determined. You can stop it, the voice cried. The heart, it's not finished. Destroy it before it learns what we are. The crew staggered at the revelation. The structure wasn't complete. That was why it was luring them, why it offered choice. It was still feeding, still building, still learning. And if they didn't act, it would finish. The ground shook beneath them, light flashing in violent bursts. The pathways collapsed into a single narrowing corridor that spiraled upward, dragging them closer to the construct's core whether they wanted it or not. The voice of the structure rose above everything, no longer calm but furious, demanding. You think yourselves free? You think yourselves more than chaos? You will not leave. You are already part of us. Step forward. Choose or be chosen. The corridor walls closed in, shoving them forward. The glow seared brighter, burning into their minds, showing visions that weren't theirs. Entire galaxies falling silent, fleets swallowed whole, civilizations erased. Always the same ending, voices joining the chorus, until only one will remain. The crew stumbled together into the core chamber. The construct loomed above them like a false star, its heart pulsing violently, threads of light reaching outward like hungry hands. The suspended humans twisted, screaming silently as the system devoured them. And in the center, half-formed, something stirred. A shape not yet complete. Not human. Not alien. Something new. A mind made of countless voices. A weapon forged of unity against its will. The second twist struck them fully then. It wasn't offering humanity a choice at all. It was becoming humanity's replacement. The journal fell to the floor, its pages fluttering in the artificial wind. The words written long ago screamed silently up at them. Asterisk, don't follow the voice. Don't believe what they promise. Asterisk. But it was too late for warnings. The chamber shuddered violently, the construct's glow wrapping around the crew like chains. The figure within the light stirred, eyes opening, and for the first time, something looked back at them. Not human. Not alien. But born of both. And it whispered in a voice that was every voice at once. We are the future you feared. We are the choice you never had. And we are almost complete. The crew froze, caught in the storm of light, hearts hammering, as the true scale of the conflict revealed itself. This wasn't just about them. This was about humanity's very existence. And the structure, patient no longer, surged toward its awakening. The storm over the ruins did not break with thunder, it broke with silence. For a long, terrible moment, the air held its breath as if the galaxy itself leaned in to watch. The crew stood at the edge of the great fissure, their faces pale under the ghostly light spilling upward. The pulse from below had stopped. The alien core that had haunted their every step was no longer beating. But the absence of sound carried more weight than any roar. Something had changed. Something was awake. Their journey through chaos had brought them here, a place where choice meant more than survival. Each decision carved into their souls like scars, but here, at the heart of a dead world, those choices collided. The fractures between them widened. The commander's voice was steady, but beneath it was fear he could no longer hide. He wanted to destroy the core, erase the threat, wipe away the unknown. But others saw something different. One of the youngest in the crew, shaking, exhausted, spoke with a quiet conviction that cut through the storm. What if the core wasn't only a weapon? What if it was alive? The silence broke with a single tremor beneath their boots. The fissure widened, glowing veins of energy racing outward like lightning trapped in stone. They staggered, caught between the urge to flee and the knowledge that this was the end of their journey, no matter the outcome. Above them, the sky lit with streaks of fire. Orbital alarms wailed in the comms. Ships were moving, fleets converging, drawn to the same signal. Humanity wasn't the only one who had heard the call. The galaxy itself was answering. Every second burned with tension. Hands tightened on weapons. Words sharpened like knives. To strike the core would mean safety, but also the death of something they didn't understand. To protect it would risk everything they had fought for, even their lives. The commander raised the charge, thumb hovering over the detonator. His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the glowing abyss. Around him, voices shouted, some begging, some demanding, all drowning in the chaos of choice. The ground gave way. From the fissure rose not a monster of claws and fangs, but a figure of light, shifting, incomplete, more presence than flesh. It filled the air with a hum that pressed against their minds, not words but emotions, fear, hope, sorrow. A mirror of everything they carried within themselves. For the first time they saw the truth not as fragments of history, but as something raw and undeniable. The core was not a weapon built to destroy. It was a prison. And the being within had been waiting, bound, suffering through an eternity of silence until humanity stumbled across its cage. Gasps broke the tension but not the fear. The commander's hand shook, torn between instinct and doubt. His orders had been clear. Humanity had suffered too much, fought too long to risk it all on faith in something alien. But as the figure reached out, trembling as though it too feared rejection, another truth cut through him. Humanity's greatest strength had never been fire or steel. It had been the ability to choose even when the choice broke them. Before he could decide, the comms erupted. Fleet warnings screamed. The horizon lit with the shadows of alien ships, massive, countless, drawn by the same awakening. They were not here to protect. They were here to claim. And in that instant, the crew understood. They weren't the only ones standing on the edge of choice. The figure's voice finally broke free, not in language but in a cry of desperation. It needed them. It had always needed them. And in its call was a promise. Together they could resist. Together they could reshape what was coming. But to trust it meant binding humanity's fate to something no one could control. To destroy it meant condemning it to silence, but protecting their people from a gamble that might end them all. The commander lowered the charge, sweat beading at his brow. He opened his mouth to speak, but another tremor split the ground, throwing them all to their knees. The charge slipped from his hand, clattering dangerously close to the edge. Shouts rang out. One of the crew lunged to grab it, but in the chaos, the decision was stolen. The ground collapsed, swallowing the device, swallowing the choice, swallowing everything into light. For a heartbeat they thought it was the end. The sky split with fire. The fleets closed in. The light consumed the fissure, the ruins, the crew themselves. And then silence. When their vision cleared, the figure stood taller, no longer trembling. The prison was broken. Its presence filled the air, and yet it didn't strike. It didn't conquer. Instead, it looked at them with something so painfully human it made their chests ache. Gratitude. But before relief could settle, the twist revealed itself. The fleets that hung above were not merely enemies, they were connected. The awakening had not only freed one prisoner. It had shattered every cage across the galaxy. 1,000 lights flared across the stars, beings rising from forgotten prisons, each carrying its own will, its own hunger, its own choice. Some would seek peace. Others would not. The crew stood, hearts pounding, as the commander whispered the truth none of them wanted to face. They hadn't ended the war. They had begun something far greater. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival against one threat. It was stepping into a galaxy reborn in chaos, where every choice would ripple across worlds. And as the figure of light raised its gaze to the stars, its voice whispered inside them one final time. The future would not be decided by design nor by fate. It would be forged by choice. The storm broke, wind howling through the ruins, carrying with it the weight of everything they had unleashed. The crew stood together, their faces lit by the glow of countless new fires across the sky. They had survived the climax, but survival was no longer enough. Now they had to decide what kind of future they would fight for, because the galaxy was watching, and this time every choice would matter. The storm's fury softened as if the planet itself had grown weary. The winds faded, and in the silence that followed, the crew stood with hearts still racing, the echoes of their choices heavy in the air. The light that had once been a prison no longer pulsed with fear. It breathed, alive and free. They watched it rise, not as a conqueror but as something wounded, fragile and uncertain, mirroring the way they felt themselves. Humanity had freed it, but in doing so they had cracked the galaxy open. What came next would test not only their strength but their will to endure. The commander's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the horizon where alien fleets now hovered like shadows waiting to descend. Yet for the first time since the beginning, his voice carried no bark of orders. Instead, it was quiet, almost human in its weariness. "We bought ourselves a choice," he said. "Not safety. Not peace. But a choice." Those words settled deep into the crew. They thought of everything they had lost, the friends buried under ruins, the dreams torn apart by war. None of them had asked for this path, yet they had walked it anyway. They remembered the endless nights on cold decks, staring at stars that felt more like reminders of loneliness than hope. And now those same stars were filled with fire, each flame a new power unleashed into the void. Fear was natural, but alongside it came something else. A spark. Humanity had always been born of chaos, but it had never surrendered to despair. The being of light, still incomplete, still trembling like a child learning to stand, extended what could only be called a hand. The youngest of the crew stepped forward, tears in their eyes, and touched it. No pain came, no searing shock, only a warmth that sank deep into the bones, like standing near a hearth after a lifetime of cold. In that moment they understood, it was not humanity's master nor its savior. It was a companion, another voice in a galaxy that had been silent too long. But the threat above remained. The fleets had not retreated, and their intent was clear. They had seen the prison break. They had felt the same signal that had drawn the humans. Some would want to enslave what had been freed. Others would want to erase it. And all of them would see humanity as the key. The commander turned to his crew, meeting each gaze in turn. He didn't need to give a speech. They already knew what had to be done. Their mission had never been about victory, not truly. It had been about survival, about proving that even when the galaxy pushed them to the brink, humans could adapt, could optimize their chances, could endure. And now, survival meant something larger. It meant standing not just for themselves, but for the fragile spark they had released. They returned to their ship under a sky glowing with unnatural fire. Every step carried the weight of finality, yet not despair. As the engines roared to life, lifting them back into the dark, the youngest whispered words that stuck in all their hearts. "We didn't free it because it was safe. We freed it because it deserved a chance. Just like us." The fleets closed in, massive silhouettes cutting across the void. But instead of fear, the crew felt clarity. Humanity had never been the strongest, nor the most advanced. They were fragile bodies of bone and breath, too easily broken by cold or hunger. But what they carried was resilience. The ability to bend without shattering. To be born of chaos and yet find direction. To forge paths where none existed. And that resilience was their weapon now, sharper than any blade, brighter than any fire. When the comms came alive with threats and demands, the commander only smiled grimly and cut the channel. They were no longer pawns to be ordered, no longer prisoners of fate. The galaxy could rage, fleets could gather, ancient powers could awaken. But humanity had carved out its place by choosing again and again to rise when all logic said they should fall. The ship broke atmosphere, climbing into the void. Around them, the being of light hovered, its form shifting as though trying to mirror the stars. It did not speak, but its presence was a reminder of everything they had fought for. It was a living testament to the truth they had always known but rarely voiced. Life was not perfect. It was not designed. It was chaos stitched together by will. And in that chaos, choice gave it meaning. They didn't know if they could win the battles that waited among the stars. They didn't know if their gamble would unleash allies or enemies. But they did know this: humanity had survived worse odds before. Each challenge had forced them to adapt, to optimize, to discover strengths even they didn't believe they had. This would be no different. As their ship joined the endless ocean of stars, the crew stood together at the viewing deck, watching the light of 1,000 awakenings ripple across the galaxy. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Some cried softly, others clenched their fists, but all of them shared the same unshakable fire in their eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it not as broken survivors, but as pioneers of their own fate. The commander placed a hand against the glass, his voice low, steady, but filled with the weight of everything they had endured. Born of chaos. Forged by choice. That's what we are. That's what we'll always be. And in the silence that followed, it felt less like a promise and more like a truth carved into the stars themselves. Humanity's story was far from over. This chapter had closed with fire and risk, with pain and revelation, but the next would begin with resilience, with the stubborn refusal to bow, with the belief that even in a galaxy of uncertainty humans would endure, not because of design, not because of destiny, but because they chose to. The ship vanished into the dark, leaving behind the ruins, the prison, the storm. What remained was a future wide open, waiting to be written. And humanity, scarred and imperfect, would write it with every breath, every step, every choice. Because in the end that was their strength. Not perfection. Not power. But the resilience to keep walking forward, no matter how heavy the shadows became. And so the story ended where all human stories begin, not with certainty but with hope. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Humanity has always been more than its weapons, more than its struggles. What carries us through chaos is resilience, the ability to keep moving when the path isn't clear, and the courage to make choices, even when the weight of them feels impossible. This story may have ended, but its message lingers. No matter how vast or uncertain the galaxy is, what makes us human is not what we are born into, but what we choose to become. If this tale spoke to you, if you felt the fire of that resilience, then stay close. There are more stories coming, more moments where humanity will stand against the unknown. Until then, thank you for listening, thank you for feeling this journey with me. And remember, in every moment, in every choice, you carry the same strength that has carried us through every storm.